And for more insight on the situation in the Middle East, we are joined by Dr. H.A. Hellyer. He's Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Hellyer. We'll get to what Mr. Blinken said in a moment, but stepping back for a moment. I mean, as recently as maybe the middle of June, many people were still saying Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah had no interest in expanding the conflict beyond Gaza and just some border, some conflict on the border. From this weekend, so Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've seen that change, or have we not?
First, thank you anyway, Sue, for having me on your program. I don't know if we've seen a change. I think there's been a few things here that we have to keep in mind over the last few days. The Israelis, yes, they targeted Hezbollah in southern Beirut, and they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. It's incredibly reckless. I don't think that this would have been the best course of action if they were seeking de-escalation as opposed to escalation. But I don't think they've thrown their own interpretation of the rule book out of the window, because one presumes they think that the Iranians and Hezbollah will respond only up to a particular point. That's point number one. Point number two, in order for a complete spiraling of the situation to occur and for complete regional conflict to take place, they need to have that sort of engagement from the Iranians and Hezbollah and others. And I'm not sure that they've got it. And I also think that you have one last point here, which is the opportunism of Benjamin Netanyahu, who's being pressured in different quarters, including domestically among Israelis, to go for some sort of ceasefire, even of a temporary one, with Hamas in order to get the hostages back. And one has to remember, as soon as there's a ceasefire, you see a dynamic for Netanyahu to come out of government through new elections.
All right,
and I think he will do everything in here,
Dr. Hellyer,
that taking place.
Of all these points you've made, I think there's something underlying all of that. If one assumes, and I have to assume because I don't know better, that Israel is behind the killing of Mr. Haniyeh, all that you said, yes. How do you sum up Israeli intentions if it is responsible for this killing?
I think that they, frankly, when it comes to Ismail Haniyeh, my suspicion, and of course, I don't have any way to offer full evidence for this, is that yet again, the Israelis have sabotaged ceasefire negotiations. Haaretz, a very well-known Israeli newspaper, documented recently how over the past 10 months, repeatedly, Netanyahu and his government, but Netanyahu himself personally, has sabotaged ceasefire negotiations, even above the protestations and objections of people in his own government. And within the security apparatus. So assassinating Haniyeh at this point definitely scuttles ceasefire negotiations, so just makes them really difficult right now. And I suspect that that was a big part of the point.
All right, let's bring in Secretary Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State in Singapore today, responding to this news. He said he does not want to speculate, but the priority is to secure a ceasefire. Now, given that the U.S. is Israel's closest non-ally, in fact, without being a formal ally, it is his greatest supporter, what would you read into Mr. Blinken's remarks that it is serious, Washington is serious about securing a ceasefire, and that presumably it might be putting some pressure on Israel to meet that desire?
So let's be clear here. When we talk about pressure, when we talk about leverage, the United States has tremendous leverage over the Israelis. It is its largest, by far, provider of weapons, of financial assistance, political cover at the United Nations, and over the past 10 months has used practically nothing in terms of that leverage over the Israelis in order to force a change in behavior. So frankly, when Secretary of State talks about pressure or trying to convince the Israelis to do X or Y, it's really quite meaningless. The Israelis are acting with impunity and have been for the past 10 months because they know that there aren't consequences from the United States. The moment that they thought that there would be, their behavior would change and has changed in the past. So let's be very clear here about what pressure means and what leverage means, because the United States simply has not used it and has not expressed any intention to use it to this point, despite the fact that tens of thousands of people in Gaza are dead, the vast majority of whom are civilians.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Dr. H.A. Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. Thank you for joining us.